Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here today in the Midland Institute and to see all of you here. Thanks to the Bruce Group for setting it up. Thanks to you all for coming, because there's not much of a meeting unless we have an audience. Now, the Institute here, of course, is a great symbol of social and industrial history in the Midlands. And as I walked in, I was reminded of a poem by Benjamin, which I mentioned to the manager here. The gas was on in the Institute. And what a nice man, he went away to his computer, and can you believe he came down 5 minutes later with a copy of the poem. I was very delighted and touched, but I won't read you all of it now. Now, you may be expecting me to say one or two critical things today about the government's European policy. So I think I should preface my remarks by saying that I am as pleased as any Conservative to see a Conservative Prime Minister in Downing Street. And I am very pleased by many of the things which the coalition is doing. I'm delighted that George Osborne is taking a robust approach to the deficit. He is putting the national interest, which we've heard about from Robert already, the national interest ahead of short-term popularity. He is clearly absolutely right to do so. I'm delighted by what IDS is doing about welfare. I recall that Simon Heffer said the reason we have an underclass is because we have decided to pay for one. And I think in the case of IDS, perhaps he's decided that we shouldn't pay for it anymore. I am delighted by what Michael Gove is doing on education. Our education system is broke. We clearly need to do something radical with the schools, and I think he's doing the right thing. So I commend him for that. But I'm less comfortable with one or two of the things that are going on. I am not terribly happy with Ken Clarke, Justice Minister's approach to crime and punishment. I have this old-fashioned idea that if somebody is locked up in jail, they're not burgling my house. From my point of view, I would much rather they were not burgling my house. I'm not entirely happy that George Osborne has said that he won't do anything about the new 50% tax ban. In that case, I think he is putting presentational issues and spin issues ahead of the national interest. The national interest would require us to abandon that 50% tax rate. I'm not entirely happy with Vince Cable, who is rambling on about mansion taxes and graduate taxes. My fear is that the wise old owl is rapidly becoming a headless chicken. And then, of course, there is energy and climate change. And Mr. Chris Huhne, who of course was a colleague of mine in the European Parliament during my first term, he has said that the lights won't go out on his watch. That is only true if his watch is an extremely short one, which is a consummation devoutly to be wished. If he goes on with this madness of wind farms, then we will see the lights go out in about 5 years. However, of course, Europe, for me as a Euro MP, is the big issue, and I have to be honest with you, I've had people write to me, one or two of them I see sitting here today, but I shall name no names, people who have said, how can you remain in the Conservative Party, how can you be a Conservative parliamentarian when your party is so clearly committed to the European project? And I've written back saying the Conservative Party needs a bit of Eurosceptic balance, we have to work on this, wait and see what happens when we're in government. I have cherished the hope that when we were in government and no longer constrained by those constraints that affect parties in opposition, we could be a little bit more robust. So what has actually happened? What has happened in the last 5 months under the coalition government? 2 months ago, I was sitting in the hemicycle in Strasbourg. We were voting at one of our regular plenary voting sessions. I glanced down the list and I came to a vote on the famous European Diplomatic Service, or European External Action Service, you may well have heard about it. And I noticed that we were whipped to vote in favour of it. So I was astonished, and I turned round to Charles Tannock, London MEP, and our Foreign Affairs spokesman, who sits 2 rows behind me in the chamber. We all have our set seating positions. And I said, hey, Charles, what's going on? You've got the wrong whip here on the European Diplo Service. No, no, he said, that is the correct whip. Those are instructions from London. Now, I was last elected to the European Parliament for the 3rd time in 2009. I'd like to read you a short sentence from the manifesto on which I and my Conservative colleagues were elected. Conservative MEPs will oppose plans for the EU to acquire additional powers on foreign policy and defence, such as proposals for an EU foreign minister or an EU diplomatic corps, however named. Now, is that clear to you? It's clear to me. So when our whip in the European Parliament wrote to me, and I must say also to Dan Hannan and Diva, who joined me in dissenting from the whip, our reply was very simple, that we were elected on a clear manifesto commitment to oppose the European Diplomatic Service, and that was what we did. The party can change its mind if it wishes to. We will not do so. You know, of course, about the European Diplomatic Service. It is intended to take over eventually from national diplomatic services, and a start is already being made where smaller countries do not wish to maintain embassies in 200 countries around the world, so they say, well, we're going to have European representation, we don't need it anymore. And we're assured, of course, that it won't impinge on national foreign policy or defence policy. Well, we're used to those assurances from the European Union. I'll tell you why they want a European diplomatic service. Europe already has a flag, a passport, and an anthem. It has a president. They're not quite sure which one it is. It seems to have 2 or 3 presidents. But it has a president. It has a parliament. It has a central bank. It has a currency. Tell me, which aspects of a nation state does it lack? Well, one thing that it lacked until just recently was something called a legal personality, which sounds terribly technical. What does it matter to the man in the street, a legal personality? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. Previously, when the European Union negotiated, say, a trade contract, a trade treaty, it was actually a series of treaties and the individual member states had to sign up to it. Now, because it has a legal personality, it can undertake treaties on its own behalf. Of course, it has approval procedures within the European Union, but the treaties are now signed by the EU, not by the member states. It also means that it is a credible policy that the EU should take over representation of European countries in international organisations, starting, of course, with the United Nations. And we know that they're extremely keen to do that. What else did it lack? It lacked a diplomatic service. So, of course, it had to create one, and it has. And an extremely suitable person has been chosen, Baroness Ashton, to run this organisation. Let me just remind you about Baroness Ashton. So far as I know, she has never been elected to any public office. She has held minor and intermediate posts in a number of quangos. She is a, if you like, modest quangocrat, who by virtue of being married to the right guy seems to have been promoted to the House of Lords. And then suddenly was appointed the European Trade Commissioner. As far as I know, she has no experience or interest in or knowledge about trade, but that was the job she got for a year. Taking over from our friend Mr. Mandelson. Now, I have few good words to say about Mr. Mandelson, but I think he did understand trade issues, and I think he was more free trade than the average of the Labour Party. Not saying a lot, but I don't think that Baroness Ashton was any great improvement. Suddenly, this unelected quangocrat, the sort of person who might make a great number 2 in a minor county council, has found herself the highest paid British politician of any. £328,000 a year, I think it is, quite a substantial sum. But also, she's trying to set up a new department when Mr. Barroso and Mr. Rumpy Pumpy, he has a Belgian name which I can't pronounce, but Rumpy Pumpy will do, the respective presidents of the Commission and the Council, actually think they should be running it, and the battle that is developing between them is fascinating. But I could talk for a long time about the European External Action Service. I don't think I will. I think my point is made. We were clear in opposition that we opposed the Lisbon Treaty. We promised a referendum on it, which for various reasons was not fulfilled. The Lisbon Treaty, of course, setting the legal basis for the European External Action Service. We were clear, we opposed the Lisbon Treaty. We were absolutely clear in black and white, and I just read you the words, that we were elected as MEPs on the basis of opposing it. Suddenly we're in favour of it. What is the excuse? I'll tell you what the excuse is. Well, eventually we're going to have to work, we're in government, we're going to have to work with this diplomatic service, so we may as well make the best of it. you may have to make the best of it. It may be absolutely right that the British government will have to work with this organisation, but that doesn't mean we have to like it, and it doesn't mean we have to pretend to approve it. We have broken our word, and we should not have done that. Let me turn to the corpus juris, European law. You are familiar with the European arrest warrant. I am particularly familiar with it because this was, of course, in place before the present coalition government. I don't blame them for that. But it is in place, and it is creating the most outrageous injustices. Last year, something like 1,300 British subjects were removed abroad without appeal, without safeguards, and they were sent to foreign jurisdictions, some very dodgy foreign jurisdictions, and I can affirm that because I have been following the cases of two of my constituents from Derby. I won't go into the story because that would take me 20 minutes by itself. But I just got the news, some of you who were here earlier will have seen me take a phone call. One of these people who have been accused and acquitted and called back on appeal and now being called back a third time, one of them has a wife who I knew was suffering from breast cancer. I have just heard the news from the Derby paper that that lady has died and her husband is due to go back for another hearing in a fortnight's time. They've asked for a delay on the hearing on compassionate grounds. It has been refused. That is the way one of my constituents is being treated under the European arrest warrant, and I tell you I'm angry about it. Theresa May, I think, recognises there are problems with the European arrest warrant, and indeed the rather unbalanced extradition treaty that we have with America. One of my American colleagues is in the audience, so I apologise for that, Joe, but never mind. And she is right, of course, to investigate it, but I understand that her investigation will not report till June of next year. That seems to me a rather lackadaisical approach to an issue which is causing huge injustices as we speak. The other thing where we can pin the blame directly on the coalition government and Theresa May is something called the European Investigation Order. It is now possible for a foreign jurisdiction, for a Bulgarian magistrate, for a Latvian prosecutor to demand information on your bank details, your DNA, your telephone records, and it then is an obligation on the British police to obtain that information and send it. No ifs, no buts, no checks, no balances, no safeguards for the citizen, no Data Protection Act. That information must be obtained by the British police and it must be sent. Now that is an outrageous infringement of our personal liberty in this country. It is also, by the way, an outrageous infringement on police time. We are just about to have the spending review. Undoubtedly the police will have less money and less officers, sorry, fewer officers, and they are having this very large, new time-consuming responsibility placed on them without any discussion. They can't go to a magistrate and say, this is a frivolous issue, will you please dismiss it? They have to do it. Why did Theresa May vote for it? Not vote for it, sign it off. That's what she did. Theresa May signed it off, and I think that is very regrettable indeed. Let me turn to a third issue, and I promise you I won't go beyond three issues that I'm concerned about, although there are many more that we could deal with, and that of course is the regulation of the City of London. Bear in mind that the City of London has the lion's share of the financial services business across the whole of Europe. It is the European Centre for Financial Services, and we have problems with regulation, of course we have, but there are problems with financial services regulation all around the world. It's not unique to London. Europe, however, thinks it knows best and it wants to regulate it. Now, the excuse they will give us, of course, is that it was the Labour government who signed up to the Lisbon Treaty, and the Lisbon Treaty creates the legal basis, so we had to accept it. No, we didn't. In fact, one of my colleagues, Vicky Ford, I pay tribute to her for the excellent work. She's an expert in this area. She's worked in the city for many years. I pay tribute to her for the rearguard action she fought to mitigate the damage and to take out some of the worst aspects of these proposals. But the fact is, the British government accepted in principle that the City of London should be regulated from Brussels and Frankfurt. They should not have accepted that in principle or at all. They should have fought tooth and nail. Yes, there may be a legal basis in the Lisbon Treaty. They could and should have fought it and kicked and screamed and made a difference, and they didn't do so. But you will say to me, which you probably won't say to me actually, but somebody will say to me, why are you so excited about this? We have a referendum lock. We have seen the press releases from David Lidington about the referendum lock. We have guaranteed to the British people that powers will now not be passed to the European Union without a referendum. If I may quote again, the 2010 Conservative Party General Election Manifesto. We will amend the 1972 European Communities Act so that any proposed future treaty that transferred areas of power or competences would be subject to a referendum lock. Thank you for nothing. It is less a referendum lock, it is more slamming the stable door when the horse is long gone. As I'm sure you will know if you've been following these matters, and if you're here you probably have been following these matters, the famous Lisbon Treaty contains passerelle or ratchet clauses that enable the European institutions to take forward their project of ever closer union without recourse to new treaties. They don't need new treaties. They can do everything they want under powers established already in the Lisbon Treaty, and they can do that without reference to referenda or to the people, because the last thing the European institutions ever wish to do is to refer to the people. If you ask the people, do they want European integration? The thankful brutes say no. So the answer is simple, don't ask them. The other point is that in the press release, which I have studied with some care, we are saying, well, we recognise there are these passerelle clauses, ratchet clauses, we will catch those too. We will actually be prepared to have a referendum on those if we think that's serious enough, but of course it is, I'm still quoting roughly, paraphrasing a little bit, it's difficult to define quite what is a ratchet clause and what is a serious transfer of power and not just a little issue, so we'll have to think about that. And David Lidington tells us there won't be any referenda in the next 5 years of this Parliament. Hang on a minute, there won't be any referenda in 5 years. We've given away these powers I've been talking to you about in 5 months. How many more will we have given away in 5 years? And there will be a vote in the House of Commons to consider whether a particular issue justifies a referendum. Well, if the government's decided to sign up to it, it probably has a majority in the House of Commons to get it through. I mean, frankly, the referendum lock is an outrageous piece of spin. It reminds me of the European word subsidiarity. Sorry, it's an English word, but common in European politics. Words like subsidiarity, things like citizens' initiatives in Europe, are there not because they create legitimacy or democracy. They are there to give a spurious impression of legitimacy and democracy while the European Union goes its own way. The referendum lock is designed to reassure sceptics in the Conservative Party that all is well, while we continue to shovel powers to Europe at an ever-increasing rate. This is not good enough. This is not the reason why I have served 11 years in the European Parliament as a Conservative MEP, or why I have run for election. I am deeply unhappy about it. What I should like to do, Mr. Chairman, I should like to conclude my remarks on an uplifting and inspiring note, full of optimism. I'm sorry to have to tell you, I have nothing uplifting or optimistic to say. Sadly, I start to despair for my party and my country.